Welcome.
Shalom.
Shalom. Okay, let's get started.
Okay. Is there red heifer linkage to Yahusha? Is it the color of the skin, or is it the blood contact conformation that we should be concentrating on? And I'm going to read that bottom one again. Note the terminology, please. Blood contact conformation. That's quite a bit different than the color of the skin. So what is it? That's important. What does the Hebrew language, the Hebrew definitions, what do they relate to us? Contents, part 2. This is some of the things we're going to be looking at. Content for the red heifer sacrifice and its purpose. And is the red heifer type linked to Yahusha? And what about the camp location relationship qualification? It's kind of an awkward title, but the camp location is very important. Number 4, the imposed veil on the red heifer. Have we been given some information that obscures the actual truth of the Hebrew definitions for the red heifer? Has there been a veil pulled over the information that we need to know to connect with Yahusha? How about the sacrifice at the door of the tabernacle? What does the statutes say about that? And the altar and that which sanctifies, how does this connect with the offering and to Yahusha? And here's a very, very good one. The worm's gender identification. The worm's gender identification and the Ruach. What does this worm and its gender identification have to do with the Ruach? What lesson will it teach us? And the worm of the fire. What does a worm have to do with a fire? And what fire is it? The fire of the red heifer? Why does the scarlet need to be thrown into the fire? And last of all, we're going to be looking at the worms of the scriptures. Kind of a strange title, but that's what we're going to be looking at. True believers speak Yahusha's life into the world around them through lips that are covered by the blood of Mashiach. The bride of the Mashiach is uniquely his, and she is progressively becoming more and more like him. Progressively, most certainly. How? By examining the Melchizedek covenant and making a persistent effort to align more within that covenant. Yahusha was clothed in a scarlet robe. Yes, I emphasize that on purpose. A scarlet robe to symbolize not only his royalty, but his life and his blood. The word blood in the scriptures is associated with life. We are told at least twice in Leviticus 17, 11, and 14 that the life of all flesh is in the blood. Why does it not say the life is in the skin? And I'm referencing to the red heifer. The symbolism of the scarlet robe also provides us with a link to the rider of the white horse in Revelation 19, 11 to 16, the one who is clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of Yahuwah, verse 13. That robe has a name written on it, King of Kings and Master of Masters, verse 16. Here we see Yahusha HaMashiach exalted above all, clothed in his spiritual blood of Mashiach, the scarlet robe. In other words, he is clothed in life. So why would I have a picture of a worm on the left side? Is that where the scarlet comes from? And what about the skin of the heifer on the right? It is a red color. But what connection does scarlet have with a red heifer offering? The instructions concerning the red heifer are found primarily in Numbers 19. What is the symbology of the red heifer in view of Yahusha? What about the red heifer requirement? Do we read of an event in the life of Yahusha that directly reflects this divine requisite? Matthew 27:28. And having stripped him, they put a scarlet robe on him. Scarlet. Why scarlet? Why a worm? We're going to be looking at this coming up. That worm again. A closer look at the robe of mocking authority. Now, in these verses, I have left the numbers on the words specifically so that you have the numbers to look up yourself, and you can take these numbers and search it out. I know it's a little bit harder to read, but sometimes these numbers are important. Matthew 27:28. And they stripped him and put on him a scarlet robe or military cloak. Scarlet. There's that worm again. The brilliant red military cloak was specifically to mock his authority. Verse 31. And after that they had mocked him, they took the robe, the military cloak, off from him, and put his own raiment on him, and led him away to crucify him. The brilliant red military cloak. Where did they get that scarlet color from? Could it be from the worm? The robe of scarlet. A heifer and a worm. Why a heifer and a worm? Are these two linked? And can we link them directly to Yahusha? Why the divine requirement for a red heifer? Could not a black or white or even a fancy spotted one provide the same blood quantity and or prophetic cleansing quality within the ashes? What specific reasons did Yahuwah have in mind when he stipulated by statute a red heifer? 1 John 5:8. And there are three that bear witness in the earth, the spirit, and the water, and the blood. And these three agree in one. Yah's spirit is his breath. The water and blood are from him. These three are witnesses on this earth to the one ultimate sacrifice. And if we remember when he was impaled on the tree, he did, there was water and blood that came out when he was impaled. Can this earthly red heifer sacrifice, which had the capability to cleanse complete nations, be metaphorically compared to Yahusha HaMashiach's ultimate sacrifice, which can and will cleanse, forgive, and heal anyone willing? Can we equate Yahusha to the red heifer? A red heifer, or the red heifer, a sin offering. The full purpose of the red heifer offering was for purification of sin and to remove defilement from contact with a dead body. Let's look at Numbers 19:9. And a clean man shall gather up the ashes of the heifer and shall place them outside the camp in a clean place. And they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for the water, for uncleanness. It is for the cleansing from sin. The red heifer ashes mixed with water were to cleanse people who were unclean and defiled. And what of the scarlet or crimson thrown into the red heifer sacrifice fire? Was there a purpose for this also? Let's look at Psalms 22. This is a prophecy of the trials surrounding Gabbatha. But I am a worm, that is tola, and that is scarlet. That's where the color comes from. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised of the people. All they that see me laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head, saying, He trusted on Yahuwah that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him, seeing he delighted in him. But thou art he that took me out of the womb. Thou didst make me hope when I was upon my mother's breasts. I was cast upon thee from the womb. Thou art my Elohim from my mother's belly. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have compassed me, strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They gaped upon me with their mouths, as a ravening and a roaring lion. I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it is melted in the midst of my bowels. Could we equate this to Yahusha's feelings just before he was crucified? And what would he be doing when he says, but I am a worm? Why would he identify himself with that which he created? There will be more in that coming. Can scarlet and crimson, can it cleanse naturally? This is a prophecy of the Messiah, and here we see that Yahusha called himself a worm. In the Hebrew, this is the tola worm or crimson worm. In Latin, it is the Coccus ilicis that climbs into the Hermes oak and dies for its children. And dies for its children, staining the tree red for 3 days. The word finished in the original Greek means paid in full. We owed a debt we could never pay. And Yahusha, he paid a debt he didn't owe for us. Sin no longer has dominion over us if we accept his sacrifice for us, as noted in Romans 6:14. The crushed Coccus ilicis contains a chemical that is an antibacterial agent, which is why it was used in 2 types of purification ceremonies. When there was a plague, scarlet was included in the purification of the house. And he shall cleanse the house with the blood of the bird, and with the running water, and with the living bird, and with the cedar wood, and with the hyssop, and with the scarlet. There is a lot of linkage in these phrases, and we can link these all to Yahusha. And I hope you're going to be able to see this by the end of part 3. Well, by the end of part 2 also, but part 3 we will for sure. The red heifer ashes cleansed from contact with a dead body. But Yahusha's ultimate sacrifice is so much more. The Mashiach sacrifice cleanses from a dead body also. The dead bodies of syncretism and paganism. The red heifer, is it effective after Yahusha's death? Numbers 19:16. Anyone in the open field who touches someone, and we're thinking of the Passion Week right now, slain by a sword, or who has died, or a bone of a man, or a grave, is unclean for 7 days. Mary was in the tomb, Luke 23:55, and the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. The ladies were inspecting to make sure every detail was done to perfection and nothing short of it. The Passion Week. Yahusha presented himself to Mary Magdalene just before dawn when it was still dark on the first cycle of the week, Shabbaton in Roman reckoning. That's seen in John 20, verse 17. He commanded Mary not to touch him. On the next slide, we will see a clear scriptural reason for Yahusha's command to Mary. Mary did not necessarily need to physically touch the body of Yahusha while inspecting his burial process, but indeed she was inside the tomb to oversee proper cultural burial etiquette. Was Mary unclean at that moment on Passover, Abib 14, the burial night, the burial preparation night, as we see in Luke 23:54? Did Mary become unclean because she was in the tomb? Complications concerning death, Numbers 19:14. This is the Torah when a man dies in a tent. All who come into the tent and all who are in the tent are unclean for 7 days. Mary was in the clean tomb, inspecting. Was she then unclean? As with the normal death of a human being, it would be 7 cycles before she could be clean once again. It was imperative for Yahusha to command Mary not to touch him prior to presenting himself in the heavenly court before Yahuwah as the ultimate flawless sacrifice. And yes, he had to be flawless. Yahusha, the first fruit, would not jeopardize our salvation. He simply would not allow defilement. Daniel 9:27. And he shall make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, that would be the 4th cycle, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. The sacrifices were then ended. And upon the wing of abominations shall come one that maketh desolate, and even unto the full end. And that determined shall wrath be poured out upon the desolate. So these sacrifices were to be terminated at the death of Yahusha. Does that include the red heifer sacrifice? In light of the red heifer's statutes, was Mary contaminated from inspecting Yahusha's burial process? No. The sacrifices had been terminated by the death of Yahusha. There was no more possibility to be cleansed by the water and ashes mixture of the red heifer. Mary was simply, as a human being, a sinner. Yahusha could not be defiled by a sinner in any way. The red heifer statutes had no bearing on this meeting at dawn. The red heifer, does it resemble Yahusha? Number 19:2. This is a law of the Torah which Yahuwah has commanded, saying, Speak to the children of Yisrael that they bring you a red heifer, a perfect one, in which there is no blemish, on which a yoke has never come. This command, or law, H2708, is a statute which has an eternal application and definition, and H2708 usually pertains to the bride. Since the book of the law was a temporary guideline, this H2708 statute command must pertain directly to the red heifer being a perfect one that, with the bride, will remain through eternity. So how do we connect the red heifer with the bride through eternity and the perfect one? Do we see a parallel to Exodus 12:5, the perfect Passover lamb, that being Yahusha? No blemish, a flawless first fruit. Again, the red heifer, does it resemble Yahusha? The red heifer must remain flawless, never forced, coerced, nor yoked into works, being the involuntary labor or the traditions of man. Recall, 40 days Ha-Satan imposed his evil temptations upon Yahusha and failed. Yes, Yahusha remained perfect, flawless. Mark 1:13. And he was there in the wilderness 40 days, tried by Satan, and was with the wild beasts, and the messengers attended him. Could we relate that to the Passover lamb, to the red heifer? Had to be perfect and had to be flawless. Can we connect those links to Yahusha? A red heifer characteristic. The red heifer must have voluntarily laid up its life for the purpose of removing sin from mankind. Remember, that red heifer could not have been forced into anything. It had to follow, and it had to voluntarily give up its life. John 10:15. Even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. Volunteer. John 10:17. Because of this the Father loves me, because I lay down my life in order to receive it again. Volunteer. Another link to the red heifer. Yahusha volunteered. Type and antitype right there. Will the red heifer yoke qualification eliminate Yahusha? Yahusha never was yoked by another individual into offering his life for the salvation of mankind. It was always a volunteered, personal offering of his own choice. He was never yoked or snared into the burden of human, that would be the Sanhedrin, dogmatic deceptions. 1 John 3:16. By this we have known love, because he laid down his life for us. Who did? Yahusha. He laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brothers. No, the statute of no yoke does not eliminate, but effectively qualifies Yahusha as the candidate for the red heifer antitype. Just as the red heifer laid down its life voluntarily, Yahusha also laid down his life voluntarily. Having experience on a ranch, when a bovine is treated extraordinarily well, for some reason that animal willingly, without reservation or resistance, will follow its leader. Did Yahusha also voluntarily give up his life for mankind without resistance? Acts 8:32. And the passage of the scripture which he was reading was this: he was led as a sheep to the slaughter, and like a lamb silent before its shearer, so he opened not his mouth. Volunteer. Do we blame the earthly powers? Are we correct in stating that the Pharisees and Sadducees forcefully tortured Yahusha before taking his life? Yes and no. Yes, they carried out their evil intentions. However, it was only that Yahusha allowed it to happen that they were able to crucify him. We would do good to remember John's recordings. John 18:6. When therefore he said to them, I am, they drew back and fell to the ground. Simply by voice, in identifying himself as I am, that being Yahusha, the earthly men hit the dirt just by his voice. What would happen if he had called in legions and legions of his angels to help him? He didn't need to. He did it simply by voice. He said, I am. He identified himself, and the men were helpless. They were rendered useless. The rabble men had zero power over Yahusha. His sacrifice was fully volunteered. Next, the camp relationship qualification. Where does Yahusha stand in this camp relationship? The red heifer and Yahusha crucified. Crucified where? Numbers 19:3. And you shall give it to Eleazar the priest, and he shall bring it where? Outside the camp. and shall slaughter it before him. The red heifer was to be slain outside the camp. Eleazar, the prince of priests, or chief priest, was to take the red heifer outside the camp to perform the burnt offering there before his very eyes. The chief of priests must be viewing this red heifer sacrifice with his eyes. And what of our Mashiach? Where was he crucified? Hebrews 13:12 shows us that this directly connects Yahusha to the red heifer. And so Yahusha also suffered outside the gate to set apart the people with his own blood. Can that be said about the red heifer blood? To cleanse the people with the blood of the red heifer? Is that a setting apart to be cleansed? Yahusha did this. He volunteered. It was his blood that did it. The red heifer also set apart people with his own blood. Again, we see type and antitype once again in the red heifer and Yahusha. The red heifer blood and Yahusha's blood. Yahusha was to set apart the people with his own blood. Other sacrifices saw the blood removed. Is it possible to see a similar link exposing a direct connection between the command to include the red heifer's blood in the burnt offering and Yahusha's offering of his own blood specifically to atone or cleanse for the sins of mankind? A direct linkage between the red heifer and Yahusha, type and antitype. Life is in the blood of Yahusha, and in the type it was in the blood of the red heifer. The high priest must officiate the red heifer sacrifice. The chief of priests must be present at this sin offering. The question: which Kohen Hagadol, or high priest, presided over the voluntary Passover lamb offering for the salvation of mankind? Caiaphas, by default of purposely renting his priestly garment, immediately eliminated himself as the authentic Kohen Hagadol. In fact, he qualified himself to be stoned on the spot. It's too bad they weren't paying attention. Yahusha, the Kohen Hagadol under the Melchizedek order, was the only authentic Kodosh, high priest in existence at the time of the Abib 14 Passover at Golgotha. Yahusha presided as a high priest over his own sacrifice. Where was Golgotha located? The hill of execution was outside the city walls of Jerusalem, apparently near a road and not far from the sepulchre where Yahusha was buried. Golgotha, the place of the skull, where Yahusha was crucified, was outside the city of Jerusalem. This factor infinitely equates to the red heifer offering, which also, by statute, was to be burned outside the Hebrew camp. Numbers 19:3. Outside the camp, both of them. And the red heifer's blood, Numbers 19:4. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood 7 times. Where? Toward the front of the tent of meeting. But Golgotha, often named Calvary, is on the other side of Jerusalem, just outside the eastern wall, northeast of the Temple Mount. Outside the eastern wall. The 7 times symbolizes the 7 locations on his body where he shed blood, and also the perfect number of the plan of salvation. 7 times the red heifer blood was sprinkled. What about Yahusha's loss of blood? He sweat blood at Gethsemane. Then there come the the crown of thorns on his head. He lost blood there. And what about the nails in his hands at the crucifixion? 2 times loss of blood there. And the feet, 2 times with nails in his feet. He lost blood there. And what about when he was impaled on the tree? He lost blood and water there. Where in terms of the temple location did these final events occur? These 7 times that Yahusha lost blood, the Kodesh Red Heifer Type pattern duplicated. And yes, I was also reminded of the many lashes to his skin where he lost blood. The location of the red heifer offering, Numbers 19:4. And Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle some of its blood 7 times. Where? Toward the front of the tent of meeting. Yahusha also shed his blood on top of the hill of Golgotha outside of the city with a full frontal view of the tabernacle. How can we understand this to be as stated? Matthew 27:50. And Yahusha cried out again with a loud voice and gave up his spirit. And see, the veil of the dwelling place was torn in 2 from the top to the bottom, and the earth was shaken, and the rocks were split. Who witnessed these events? Matthew 27:54. And when the captain and those with him who were guarding Yahusha saw the earthquake and all that took place, they feared exceedingly, saying, truly this was the Son of Elohim. The centurion, seeing all that took place, and yes, all that took place, which includes the renting in twain of the veil from top to bottom, was by necessity facing a full frontal view of the tabernacle. Could Yahusha's offering qualify as the antitype? It was outside the city. It was facing the front of the tabernacle. Could Yahusha's blood offering complement or fulfill the red heifer type? Can we see Yahusha as the antitype to the red heifer? The red heifer's body completely. Numbers 19:5. And the red heifer shall be burned before his eyes. He burns its hide and its flesh and its blood and its dung. The whole body, complete, was to be offered for the cleansing from sin. Not one part was to be admitted. The offering was to be performed in full view of the chief of priests. There's the offering and the fire. The red heifer's blood too? The blood of the heifer was an important integral part of the offering. This blood was commanded to be burnt with the offering. How does this relate to our Mashiach? Hebrews 9:14. How much more shall the blood of the Messiah, who through the everlasting Spirit offered himself unblemished to Elohim, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living Elohim? At dawn, the first cycle of the week, John 20, verse 17, Yahusha stood before Yahuwah as the perfect sacrifice and nothing short of it. After the resurrection, he, being flawless, became the first fruit offering on Wave Sheaf Day. Yes, indeed, Yahusha was the first one to observe a feast of Yahuwah after the crucifixion. And then he commanded it to be so for the Pentecost day coming. The feasts are valid today as they were back then. The red heifer offering had also a physical import. Yahusha's blood offering was much more than a physical offering. It ultra importantly primarily operated on a fully spiritual basis. Has there been a veil insidiously imposed upon the red heifer sacrifice? The significance of Yahusha's blood offering, Matthew 26:27. Then he took the cup and gave thanks and gave it to them and said, "Take, drink of it, all of you. This is my blood of the new covenant, which is shed for many for the remission of sins." Wasn't that what the red heifer blood was to do? Is to cleanse from sin? What does Yahuwah reveal in the Torah about the foundational import of the blood? Leviticus 17:11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. How about Yahusha's blood? Was this a prophecy of Yahusha's sacrifice? I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. Why is it then that people concentrate on the color of the skin and the hair for the red heifer offering? The next 4 slides are a review from part 1, and then for some very revealing information. So this is what we have seen in part 1. We're going to go over it again, just as a reminder. Instead of eglah being translated as heifer, we read parah, which is the same word used to describe Abraham. The word parah, which is translated as heifer, clearly means fruitful, according to all Hebrew lexicons. This was also the case regarding the blessing promised to Abraham, to be fruitful. The word parah is associated with Egypt and Joseph. It was in Egypt that Joseph flourished. Prior to his death, Israel spoke prophetic words and blessings over all his sons. The first words spoken over Joseph were, Genesis 49:22, Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over the wall. Many translations describe Joseph as a fruitful bough, but in Hebrew it reads perote ben. The word ben is literally son. Joseph is emphatically described as a fruitful son. That would make him a very fruitful man like Abraham. So how does all of this information compare to the red heifer? The mysterious red heifer is also known as parah adamah. There's that word, fruitful, with adamah behind it. The word adamah means ground. Note the connection with the first man, Adam, who was specifically named after the origin of his being, the ground. Adam was literally formed from the dust of the ground. The word for dust is afar, which also means ashes. So Adam was actually taken from the ashes of the ground. Please keep in mind, the red heifer was transformed into ashes. Clearly, there is a connection with man and the red heifer sacrifice. Is there also a connection from the red heifer to Yahusha HaMashiach? The word Adam means man. When looking closer, the word dam means blood. Therefore, the emphasis of this sacrifice is clearly on the blood, not the color. And ultimately, it is the blood contained with Adam, not the blood of an animal, that is being emphasized. Not the skin, We're looking at the color of the blood. Revealing the blood information next. Is Dom actually referencing the skin on the heifer, the color of the skin on the heifer? Adame, H122 is translated to us as red. Dam, H1818, which is inside this word, is translated to us as blood. Question, is the word Dom, is this a real description of Dom? Let me ask that again. Is the word Dom blood? Remember, Hebrew words are action-based. Is blood a noun or is it action? So is this a real description of Dom? We must remember that Hebrew is an action-based language. What if Dom describes a continuous action that occurs within the heifer? What implication to salvation would this action contain? And to whom would it indicate? Can we link that to Yahusha? Let's look at it. Could it be that the blood is that which accomplishes Dom, as in action, accomplish? Is there an action that the blood does that we can relate directly from the red heifer to Yahusha? Here's some information from John Parkhurst actually, from 1762 in his Hebrew lexicon. Let's look at the definitions of this complex root word, Dom, which is translated to us as blood. What is the purpose and action of blood? What parts of the body does the blood not connect with? Are there any? How many people that are chosen in Yahusha's body does he not connect with? None. So can we compare him to the blood that connects with everyone within his body? Just a question to think about. The general idea of this difficult and extensive root seems to be equable, even, level, uniform, or conform. Equer, exequer, and conformar. The top yellow line there, shall equal. Next one down, to make equable or equal, to put on a level and compare. The pink box again, Dom. To whom will we equal me, or make me equivalent, or liken me that we may be equal or conform? To be equal, be on a footing, level with. Further down, similitude or likeness, whose parts are equable and conform to its archetype. A lot different than when we just receive the word blood, isn't it? There's a lot of meaning behind this word Dom that we do not see when we're just given blood. Yes, we need to look deeper. Dom, in our form or image, general form or delineation, the conformity or resemblance of the parts, both of body and soul. A likeness. Does the red skin of the heifer contact, as in deliver life to, the heart, the liver, the lungs, the brain, etc., etc.? So what about the blood? Does the blood conform to each and every part of the body, delivering oxygen among other essentials to each one? Is the blood the equalizing factor that permits every organ and minute particle of the body to live? Is the skin Is the skin also capable of servicing each and every portion of the body? Think the physical body and the body, the bride. We need to dig deeper into the word dom. Of course, the physical aspect comes to mind, but what about the spiritual construct? More on this from this lexicon. The second and principal reason for prohibiting the eating of blood was to be a constant memorial to men that their lives were forfeited to divine justice, and that without shedding the blood of the great atoner, there was no remission. And on the right, the blood of animals, which in the course of its circulation is by the animal economy wonderfully assimilated or conformed to all the various constituent parts of the body which want supply or nourishment. How about Yahusha's blood? Does the body of Yahusha desire that nourishment? All parts of it? Is there a link from the blood of the red heifer to the blood of Yahusha? The ingesting of blood is strictly prohibited. What about the skin? Was there ever a time in the scriptures where shedding of the skin became ultra important? In the hours before his crucifixion, what substance did Yahusha shed during his deep prayer? Was it skin or drops of blood? Is it possible that the focus of the red heifer has been shifted from the thorough eternal or internal unifying blood contact for every portion of the body, and is it refocused to the color of the surface, the skin, and the hair? Have we been given a surface understanding that turns into a veil? Has there been a veil purposely drawn over the red heifer sacrifice? Has the deep meaning of the blood been removed from us? Is it now easier to link the red heifer type to the antitype being Yahusha? Are we able to equate the unifying connection of blood to the internal body parts of the heifer to Yahusha HaMashiach, who also has full and complete spiritual connection with each and every person within the body of the Melchizedek administration? Does this divine connecting factor also supply life to his body, his chosen priesthood? Is this red heifer sacrifice becoming very significant? Adam. I'm going to look more at this word, Adam. In the bottom corner, bottom left hand, is remarkably applied to the female sex. Also the proper name of the first man, Adam. Upon reading Genesis 5:2, we see that the categorical term Adam was applied by Yahuwah to both the first man and woman. While their form was somewhat different, their substance is identical. Adam. Is it possible that we have been duped into considering only the color of the skin, making sure there was less than 3 hairs total on the animal that are not red? Have we been misled on the extreme importance of Dom, the uniting factor that conforms, connects, and unifies each and every organ of the body? If we find that the red heifer blood was a symbolic type of Yahusha, the cleanser and the paschal sacrifice, are we able to realize that Yahusha is the Dom, the unifying factor, the Kohen HaGadol, the Ruach HaKodesh, which connects, unifies, and supplies life to each and every individual within the body of his people? There's a lot of words there to think about and consider. And it all goes back to Adam and Dom, the blood. Looking at the relevance of a blood offering, Leviticus 17:11, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. Our salvation is purely dependent on Yahusha's blood offering made on the tree. Where? Outside of Jerusalem. Continuing with the verse, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. Yahusha's blood was offered as a means of cleansing our souls from the sins that we afflict upon ourselves while living in this world. Continuing on the verse, for it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. Yahusha's blood alone is able to cleanse us to the point of acceptability to stand before Yahuwah. Cleanse. Why the worm? Where did the red, scarlet, crimson color come from that was thrown into the red heifer fire? Is it from that worm? Looking at the relevance of a blood offering, John 6:54. Whoso eateth my flesh and drinketh my blood hath eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. In the proper application, our physical ingesting of the juice from the vine exposes our comprehension that the blood shed by Yahusha contains the miraculous healing and cleansing effect that removes the stain of sin from our lives. A question. Could the actual ashes from a burnt heifer blood offering really cleanse a person from defilement? Or did the addition of the double-dipped crimson fabric to the heat of the heifer fire link to a deep spiritual connection to Yahusha, the one and only, who could permanently remove the stain of sin? Please note that double-dipped crimson, that is emphasized for a very specific reason. Double-dipped. And what about the heat of the fire? Did Yahusha pass through the heat of intensity before he died? The red heifer with its blood offering. Please note that all other sacrifices had the blood removed and placed elsewhere. The blood was either proportionally sprinkled and poured out onto the ground, or it was fully poured out onto the ground. Yet, the red heifer offering blood was proportionally sprinkled, and the bulk of the blood was burned with the sacrifice. What about Yahusha? Was his blood not proportionally sprinkled 7 times through the sweating of blood and also the physical abuse of his body? Yet the bulk of his blood remained inside of his body throughout the sacrifice? Are we able to see a direct correlation between the red heifer sacrifice and Yahusha's sacrifice in the amount of blood spilled? The red heifer, an ascent offering. What was the significance of the red heifer burnt offering, or the red heifer ascent offering? Numbers 19:9. And a clean man shall gather the ashes of the heifer, and shall place them outside the camp in a clean place. And they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for the water for uncleanness. It is for cleansing from sin. Symbolically, can we see Yahuwah, the clean man? Can we see Yahusha as the ashes? And what about outside the camp? Can we see that in heaven? And the clean place in the tomb? They can both relate, both of them, to the heaven, and the clean place can be related to the tomb also. And they shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for the water. What water? Is this the water that Yahusha offered? Life, where we would never thirst? It is for the cleansing from sin. We see in there Yahusha one more time. Can this be related to the red heifer? Ponder this. There's the red heifer. There's the fire. the smoke of the red heifer blood offering ascended to the heavens. What about Yahusha? His blood offering, and he became the wave sheaf, the first fruit, the flawless first fruit. Did he not ascend and offer it? He also was an ascent offering of his own accord. The red heifer and Yahusha, ascent offerings. The scarlet oak. Within his captivity, was Yahusha taken to the tabernacle first before his crucifixion? And if not, what are the consequences and to whom? Shall we consider these commands too? Leviticus 17:3. Any man from the house of Israel who slaughters a bull or a lamb or a goat in the camp, or who slaughters it outside the camp, and does not bring it to the door of the tent of meeting to bring an offering to Yahuwah before the dwelling place of Yahuwah, blood guilt is reckoned to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people, in order that the children of Israel shall bring their slaughterings, which they slaughter in the open field. And they shall bring them to Yahuwah at the door of the tent of meeting, to the priest, and slaughter them as a peace offering to Yahuwah. Yahuwah issued this command, or statute, specifically to prevent people from sacrificing to other no gods. The locations for the trial of Yahusha, John 18:13-15. And it declares there in John 18:13-15, it declares they led Yahusha to Hanan, the father-in-law of Caiaphas, first. Then they took Yahusha to Caiaphas' residence. Matthew, Mark, and Luke reveal closely the same details. Yet we do not see that Yahusha, the Lamb of Yahuwah, was taken by this rabble crowd to the tabernacle for a proper sacrifice etiquette according to the sacrifice statute commands of Yahuwah. The Jews, being a portion of the house of Israel, were required under statute command to accomplish this task before slaying a sacrifice. Did they fulfill that task? Did they take Yahusha to the temple first? Or did they go straight to outside the camp? Were those Jews then cut off from among their people? Choose you this day whom you will worship. Because Yahusha the Lamb was not taken to the tabernacle for his ultimate sacrifice, which God then were the Sanhedrin, Pharisees, scribes sacrificing to? It most certainly was not to Yahuwah. Do they then also assume the guilt? Leviticus 17:4, blood guilt is reckoned to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. Pretty serious consequences. Why then are we continually advised to go ask a rabbi, priests who represent the same syncretized religion on whom this curse rests? Cut off. Should we blindly trust this moon-worshipping religion of man? Pretty serious question. Was there a Kodesh altar outside of Jerusalem? What divine entity sanctifies a blood offering? The fires of sanctification. The fire of the altar is what purified and sanctified the blood offerings. 1 Kings 18:24. And you shall call on the name of your mighty one, and I call on the name of Yahuwah. And the Elohim who answers by fire, he is Elohim. So all the people answered and said, the word is good. Verse 30. Elijah restored an altar that was broken down. Yahuwah, the fire of sanctification. 1 Kings 18:38. Then the fire of Yahuwah fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. Hebrews 12:29. For indeed our Elohim is a consuming fire. The fire of sanctification, purification, and acceptance, or the fire of utter rejection, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. Fire of sanctification, Exodus 3:2. And the messenger of Yahuwah appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. And he looked and saw the bush burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Deuteronomy 4:24. For Yahuwah, your Elohim, is a consuming fire, a jealous El. The fire of Yahuwah. Most certainly we understand there was an altar at the location of the tabernacle. Did not David build an altar on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite? Was there a Kodesh altar outside of Jerusalem? 1 Chronicles 21:26. And David built there an altar unto Yahuwah, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings, and called upon Yahuwah, and he answered him from heaven by fire upon the altar of burnt offering. This was on Mount Moriah, which became the site of Solomon's temple. 1 Chronicles 21:28. At that time, when David saw that Yahuwah had answered him in the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite, then he sacrificed there. Yah's fire, a sign of approval by means of sanctification. 1 Chronicles 22:1. David then said, this is the house of Yahuwah, Elohim, and this is the altar of burnt offering for Yisrael. Indeed, there was an altar outside of Jerusalem. The scarlet oak, Psalms 22:6. But I am a worm, and no man, a reproach of men, and despised by the people. Where does Yahusha stand? And why does he liken himself to a worm? And a worm. What worm? Numbers 19:6. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet and throw them into the midst of the fire, burning the heifer. In Psalms 22:6, Yahusha is referencing himself as a worm, tola, not just any worm, and most certainly not to the word rima, H7415, feminine noun, and that word is a worm exposing and connected to corruption. Yahusha links himself with the tola, 84:15, masculine noun, that is proclaimed by him, which through fire, being transformed into ashes, is determined to cleanse people from defilement through fire. Most interesting, Yahusha links himself to the feminine mother worm, which provides life by laying down her own life, and also provides cleansing attributes and identification specifically for her children. Yahusha declares himself a worm and is the provider of life. Psalms 22:6. I am a worm. That worm is directly related and linked to scarlet. That worm is where they get the scarlet, the worm. This gender aspect of Yahusha, a masculine identity, by linking himself to a feminine identity, that is the mother tola worm, which provides life to his children, enables us a window into the Ruach HaKodesh being identified with or linked to a feminine gender. Ruach, H7307, a feminine noun. Yahusha, by identifying himself as a masculine noun, but metaphorically seen through the life-providing function of the female worm, does not make Yahusha feminine. And in likewise manner, by identifying the Ruach HaKodesh through a feminine noun, does not determine the Ruach HaKodesh as feminine. Kodesh gender job descriptions exposed. Please note that terminology. Kodesh gender job descriptions exposed. I am a worm, scarlet. Yahusha is masculine. The Ruach HaKodesh is one and the same as Yahusha, but in an invisible, omnipotent, omnipresent format. The gender function identification exposes and attaches the duty, description, purpose determined for the Ruach HaKodesh. Let me read this again. The gender function identification exposes and attaches the duty, description, purpose determined for the Ruach HaKodesh. This feminine gender identification does not provide a platform for linking the Ruach HaKodesh to the pagan female Kabbalistic mystical Shekinah goddess. Need to let that sink in. I'm going to read this one more time. This feminine gender identification does not provide a platform for linking the Ruach HaKodesh to the pagan female Kabbalistic mystical Shekinah goddess. The Ruach is not a feminine mother figure. That being said, let's get back to Numbers and the worm as seen in Job. That little rabbit, yes, the little rabbit there, I go down on rabbit trails once in a while. The worm and hyssop, Numbers 19:6. And the priest shall take cedar wood and hyssop and scarlet and throw them into the midst of the fire, burning the heifer. That scarlet is a referencing to the worm. Hyssop is used for its cleansing qualities, Psalms 51:7. Hyssop, placed onto the red heifer fire, symbolizes the healing for the nations. Note, John 19:29. Hyssop carried the vinegar given to Yahusha as a means to quell or suppress the pain of crucifixion. This was his personal fire. And right there we see the hyssop right at the peak of Yahusha's fire, same as the red heifer. Cedar, hyssop, and scarlet were select items, specifically timed for the midst of the red heifer fire, timed for when and where the heat had the most intensity. And if you look on the right, there's that picture of hyssop, an attractive little plant, actually. Can the midst of the week sacrifice, as in Daniel 9:27 of Yahusha, be considered the point of his earthly life that had the most intensity? The cedar wood, what is it about this wood that makes it qualify for the highly significant, timed for full intensity, offering to cleanse from sin? Wood is claimed to symbolize humanity. What is it that the ashes of the wood were destined for? The ash mixture remains of the wood and the red heifer were specifically commissioned to cleanse humanity from contamination. Numbers 19:9. And a clean man shall gather up the ashes of the heifer, and shall place them outside the camp in a clean place. And they shall be kept for the congregation, for the children of Israel, for the water for uncleanness. It is for the cleansing from sin. Again, the red heifer links to it. It links to Yahusha. Type fulfillment, Numbers 19:9a. And a clean man shall gather up the ashes of the heifer. Matthew 27:57. And when evening came, there came a rich man from Ramathaim named Joseph, who himself had also become a taught one of Yahusha. Verse 58. He went to Pilate and asked for the body of Yahusha. Then Pilate commanded the body to be given. Joseph of Ramathaim, the clean man, for he personally accepted Yahusha the Mashiach, he took possession of the ashes, the physical body. Type fulfillment. Red heifer, type fulfillment again. Numbers 19:9b. And shall place them where? Outside the camp in a clean place. Luke 23:50-54. And see, a man named Joseph, a council member, a good and righteous man. He was not agreeing with their counsel and deed, from Ramathaim, a city of the Yahudim, who himself was also waiting for the reign of Elohim. He, going to Pilate, asked for the body of Yahusha. And taking it down, he wrapped it in linen, and laid it in a tomb hewn out of the rock, where no one was yet laid. And it was the preparation day, and the Sabbath was approaching. Where no one was yet laid, that tomb was clean. It was not contaminated. It was a clean spot. Once again, type fulfillment from the red heifer. And we learn there, it was the preparation day. This was the night burial of Yahusha. And this is talking about the night season, and the Sabbath was approaching. That is the first Sabbath of unleavened bread on cycle number 5. Matthew 27:59-60. And having taken the body, Joseph wrapped it in a clean linen and laid it in his new tomb, which he had hewn out of the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the door of the tomb and went away. Again, Yahusha was in a new tomb, undefiled, it was clean, and he was the type fulfillment. So he was the antitype of the ashes of the red heifer. Clean, clear, and direct linkage once again. Numbers 19:9c. And they, the ashes, shall be kept for the congregation of the children of Israel, for the water for uncleanness. It is for the cleansing from sin. Let's look at John 4:14. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water, springing up into everlasting life. Both the red heifer ashes mixed with water and the spiritual water of Yahusha cleansed people from sin and led to a life of righteousness. Yes, the type, the red-blooded heifer ashes mixed with water, was replaced or fulfilled by Yahusha's blood, him being the antitype. In Ezekiel, we find prophesied type fulfillment with reference to the clean water with ashes, derived from the red heifer sacrifice, and Yahusha metaphorically applying it upon his chosen people. Ezekiel 36:24. And I shall take you from among the Gentiles, and I shall gather you out of all lands, and I shall bring you into your own land. And I shall sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean from all your filthiness, and from all your idols I cleanse you. This is alluding to the cleansing water type of the red heifer ashes and water. Yes, it was to cleanse from sin. Continuing on, and I shall give you a new heart, cleansed, and put a new spirit within you, cleansed. And I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and I shall give you a heart of flesh, cleansed, and put my spirit within you, cleansed. And I shall cause you to walk in my laws and guard my right rulings, and shall do them. Hallelujah. And you'll see more references down there where you can look for more restoration messages when you go to read this once again from the website. Next up, worms in the scriptures as seen by Job. The crimson worm is a very special worm that looks more like a grub than a worm. When it is time for the female or mother crimson worm to have babies, which she does only one time in her life, she finds the trunk of a tree, a wooden fence post, or a stick. She then attaches her body to that wood and makes a hard crimson shell. In part 3, we're going to be digging into this paragraph deep. Part 3 is going to break this wide open like you have never seen. Well, maybe you've already seen it, but if you haven't, I'm quite positive this is going to be an eye-opener for you. And we need to thank Charlene for bringing this forward, but we will be seeing this in part 3. Who does Job liken to a worm? Job identifies two different worms. Please note how Job identifies Yahusha. Job 25:6. How much less man, that is a worm, and the Son of Man, which is a worm. Now let's break this down in the Hebrew words. Here are the Strong's numbers. How much less man, that is a worm, H7415, and the Son of Man, which is a worm, H8438. There is a huge difference, massive. A window into the first worm. How much less man, that is a maggot. We see that in the Hallelujah scriptures. H582, Enosh, mortal man. According to Gesenius Hebrew Chaldee Lexicon, this word is rarely used in a singular form. The word H7415, Ramah. A sign of decay, to be exalted, to lift oneself up, with a direct connection to idolatry. So we can see very clearly why this word is not linked to Yahusha. And when taken back to the root H7311, the meaning of to breed worms is seen. Gesenius references Exodus 16:20, when the manna grew worms and stank. Worms are a form of putrefaction. This is the 5th stage of death where the decomposition of proteins occur. Mankind, in his idolatrous habitation, is likened to putrefaction. Let that sentence sink in. Mankind, in his idolatrous habitation, is likened to putrefaction. The gravitation to idolatry reduces man to the final stage of death. Another complete sentence with incredible repercussion. What about this worm? And a son of man, a worm, H8438. H1121, Ben, a male child. H120, Adam, mankind, Adam the first man. H120 gives reference to a higher standard of mankind, that being the first stage of the life of Adam, the first man, a purer blood, and uncorrupted life of righteousness before the fall. It is here that an elevated position of purity is exposed. A question now arises: who else other than Adam can be identified as having an undefiled life? And a son of man, a worm. Who is this worm? Next section, part 3, will positively identify this worm, and we're going to dig into it in detail. We're going to go over it carefully, and it is absolutely astounding, I promise you. Will the life and the death, 3 24-hour cycles, will that color a brilliant picture of the crucifixion? Why am I emphasizing the colors of the crucifixion? Remember, we have been talking about a worm that delivers scarlet. Why the colors of the crucifixion? I hope everybody joins me for part 3. And I thank you for your time and patience going through this material. We look forward to part 3. It has some very revealing information exposing the direct link from the Tola worm to the very life and death of our Mashiach. Once again, Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for joining me. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Yes.
Hallelujah.
Shalom.
Oh,
Oh,
what's
look
this?
at that one. Shalom.
Shalom. Shalom, Joyce.
Joyce. Shalom.
Shalom, everyone.
Shalom.
Blessings on your Shabbat.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, praise Yahuwah. Beautiful Abba. Thank you.
Amen.
Shalom. Save the chat.
Shalom. May the Ruach bless you on this day. I look forward to it. I do.